The sharp crack of a gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Salida, Colorado, but Rachel Blackburn didn't flinch. She'd grown numb to violence since arriving in this frontier town 3 years ago with dreams as vast as the western sky. Now, standing over her husband's fresh grave in the autumn of 1878, those dreams lay buried alongside him, leaving her with nothing but a stack of unpaid debts and a faltering ranch on the outskirts of town. "My deepest condolences, Mrs. Blackburn," Sheriff Miller said, removing his hat as the last shovelful of dirt covered Thomas Blackburn's pine coffin. "Your husband was a good man." Rachel nodded silently, her auburn hair blowing across her pale face. At 26, she'd already lived 2 lifetimes of hardship. The other mourners few as they began to disperse, leaving her alone with the bitter Colorado wind and the crushing weight of her new reality. "Mrs. Blackburn." The voice came from behind her, deep and unfamiliar. Rachel turned to see a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin. His dark blonde hair was partially hidden beneath a well-worn Stetson, and his blue eyes met hers with an intensity that made her straighten her spine. "I don't believe we've met," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Wade Sullivan." He extended a calloused hand. "I own the Double S Ranch north of your property." Rachel had heard of Wade Sullivan. Most everyone in Salida had. He'd arrived 5 years ago and built the most prosperous cattle operation in Chaffee County. Unlike Thomas, who'd squandered their savings on gambling and whiskey, Sullivan had the reputation of a hardworking, honest rancher. "What can I do for you, Mr. Sullivan?" Rachel asked, taking his offered hand briefly. Wade shifted his weight, seemingly uncomfortable. "I wanted to offer my condolences and to talk business when you're ready." "Business?" Rachel's guard rose instantly. "My husband isn't cold in his grave, Mr. Sullivan." "I understand, madam. It's just," he paused, glancing toward the town. "I've heard about your situation. The debts." Folks are talking. Of course they were. In a town like Salida, gossip traveled faster than telegram wire. "I'm managing just fine," she lied, lifting her chin defiantly. Wade's expression softened. "No disrespect intended, Mrs. Blackburn. When you're ready to talk, I'll be at the Colorado House Hotel for the next few days." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Rachel alone again with the fresh mound of dirt and the crushing uncertainty of tomorrow. The walk back to her small ranch felt endless. The 2-mile journey from town gave Rachel too much time to think about the mess Thomas had left behind. Their modest ranch house came into view as she crested the hill, and she fought back tears at the sight of peeling paint and the sagging front porch. What had once seemed full of promise now looked like just another burden. Inside, Rachel lit a lamp and pulled out the stack of papers she'd been avoiding. Bills from the general store, money owed to the feed merchant, gambling debts to men whose names she didn't recognize. And worst of all, the mortgage notice from the bank giving her 30 days to pay in full or face foreclosure. The total sum made her dizzy. $3,000. It might as well have been $1 million. Rachel collapsed into a chair, letting the tears come at last. Thomas had been a charming dreamer when she'd married him in St. Louis 4 years ago. The son of a wealthy merchant, he'd promised her adventure and prosperity in the West. Instead, he delivered heartbreak and hardship, dying in a barroom brawl over a card game he'd been cheating at. A soft knock at the door startled her. Rachel quickly wiped her tears and straightened her black mourning dress before opening it. "Mrs. Blackburn." It was Olivia Jenkins, wife of the town doctor. She held a covered basket. "I've brought some supper for you. And I wanted to check that you're all right." Rachel accepted the basket gratefully. "That's very kind of you. It's the least I can do." Olivia hesitated. "Rachel, people are concerned about how you'll manage." "I'll find a way," Rachel said, more sharply than she'd intended. Olivia's expression grew sympathetic. "I know you're strong, but Thomas left quite a mess. If you need help, thank you for the food," Rachel interrupted. She couldn't bear the pity in her friend's eyes. After Olivia left, Rachel sat alone at her small table, picking at the chicken and biscuits without tasting them. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet house, counting down the moments until she'd lose everything. The next morning, Rachel woke with the sun. There was work to be done, regardless of her circumstances. The 2 milk cows needed tending, and the chickens wouldn't feed themselves. Thomas might have been a poor provider and an unfaithful husband, but she'd made this place her home. She wouldn't surrender it without a fight. After finishing the morning chores, Rachel washed her face, changed into her one good dress, and headed to town. If she was going to save her ranch, she needed work and answers about exactly how deep her husband's debts ran. Salada had grown considerably in the 3 years since she'd arrived. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad had brought prosperity to the mountain town, with new buildings sprouting up alongside the Arkansas River. Rachel made her way to the First National Bank, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. "Mrs. Blackburn," Mr. Hollister, the bank manager, greeted her with forced politeness as she entered his office. "Please have a seat." Rachel sat stiffly on the edge of the chair. "I've come about the mortgage notice." Hollister cleared his throat. "Yes, well, I'm afraid your husband had fallen significantly behind on payments. The bank has been quite patient, but I understand," Rachel interrupted. "I'm here to ask about options, perhaps an extension or a payment plan." The banker's expression told her everything before he spoke. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Blackburn, but the bank has already shown considerable leniency. $3,000 is due in 28 days, or we'll be forced to foreclose." "And if I could pay a portion," Rachel pressed, desperation creeping into her voice. "The full amount is required," Hollister said firmly. Rachel left the bank feeling even more defeated than before. Her next stop was the Salada Sentinel office, where she hoped to inquire about work. The newspaper editor, a kindly older man named Franklin Pierce, listened sympathetically to her situation. "I wish I could help, Mrs. Blackburn," he said, "but we barely generate enough revenue to keep myself and young Jimmy employed." He paused, considering. "Have you thought about selling some of your land? That might cover the debts." "The land is mortgaged," Rachel explained. "And without it, what future would I have?" By midday, Rachel had visited every business in town that might offer a woman respectable employment. The general store needed no additional help. The schoolteacher position was filled. The hotel had no vacancies for maids. With each rejection, her options narrowed. Outside the dry goods store, Rachel paused to catch her breath. The autumn air had a bite to it, and dark clouds were gathering over the mountains to the west. As she stood there, contemplating her next move, she noticed Wade Sullivan exiting the bank across the street. Their eyes met briefly before Rachel looked away. Pride kept her from approaching him, though his words from the funeral lingered in her mind. What sort of business did he have in mind? Whatever it was, she wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. That evening, as Rachel prepared a simple supper from the remains of Olivia's basket, a loud knock sounded at her door. Wary of visitors after dark, she grabbed the shotgun Thomas had taught her to use and approached cautiously. "Who's there?" she called through the door. "Emmett Crane, Mrs. Blackburn, from the Silver Dollar Saloon." Rachel's stomach tightened. The Silver Dollar was Thomas's favorite gambling den. She opened the door slightly, keeping the shotgun visible. "What do you want?" The man on her porch was heavyset with a greasy mustache. He removed his hat in a mockery of politeness. "I've come to collect what your husband owed, $500. 500, Rachel repeated incredulously. That can't be right. 6 months of losses, madam, plus interest. Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Dalton's been patient, but he's sent me to collect. Rachel gripped the shotgun tighter. I don't have that kind of money. Crane's expression hardened. Then perhaps we can come to another arrangement. The deed to your property might satisfy the debt. This property is mortgaged to the bank, Rachel said. You'd be getting nothing but trouble. That's not my concern, Crane replied coldly. You have 1 week to come up with the money, or Mr. Dalton will take other measures to collect what he's owed. After he left, Rachel sank to the floor, still clutching the shotgun. The situation was worse than she'd imagined. Even if she could somehow satisfy the bank, there were other creditors waiting to take everything she had. Sleep eluded her that night. By morning, Rachel had made a difficult decision. She would see Wade Sullivan and hear what he had to say. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The Colorado House Hotel stood 3 stories tall on Front Street, one of the finest buildings in Salida. Rachel felt out of place as she entered the ornate lobby, conscious of her simple dress and worn boots. I'm here to see Mr. Wade Sullivan, she told the clerk at the desk. The young man nodded. He's taking breakfast in the dining room, madam. Shall I announce you? No, Rachel said quickly. I'll find him. The dining room was half full with travelers and businessmen. Wade Sullivan sat alone by a window, reading a newspaper. He looked up as she approached, surprise registering on his face before he stood quickly. Mrs. Blackburn, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Please join me. Rachel sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap. You said you wanted to discuss business, Mr. Sullivan. I'm here to listen. Wade signaled to a waiter. Coffee for the lady, please. He turned back to Rachel. Have you eaten? I recommend the breakfast steak. Just coffee, Rachel said tersely. I didn't come for a social call. When the coffee arrived, Wade leaned forward, his expression serious. I'll be direct, Mrs. Blackburn. I know about your financial troubles. The mortgage, the gambling debts, the other creditors. Rachel's cheeks burned. How could you possibly? It's a small town, Wade interrupted gently. And I make it my business to know what's happening in Chaffee County. So you've come to pick at the carcass like the others? Rachel asked bitterly. Wade's blue eyes flashed with something like hurt. No, madam. I've come to offer a solution. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document, placing it on the table between them. What is this? Rachel asked, not touching it. A deed, Wade explained, to 80 acres adjoining your property to the east. Good grazing land with water rights to Miller Creek. Rachel frowned in confusion. I don't understand. I'm proposing to buy your ranch at a fair price, Wade continued. Enough to clear your debts with the bank and Thomas's other creditors. Plus this deed to 80 acres free and clear, with a small cabin already built. You'd be debt-free with a fresh start. Rachel stared at him, trying to make sense of his offer. Why would you do this? My ranch isn't worth that much. Wade took a sip of his coffee before answering. Your ranch sits between my north and south pastures. Consolidating would make my operation more efficient. He paused. And I don't like to see good people driven to ruin by circumstances beyond their control. The offer was more generous than anything Rachel could have hoped for, yet suspicion nagged at her. No one gave something for nothing in this world. Thomas had taught her that much. What's the catch, Mr. Sullivan? Wade held her gaze steadily. No catch. Just business that happens to benefit us both. Rachel reached for the deed with trembling fingers, examining it. The property described was indeed prime land, far better than much of what she currently owned. I'll need time to think about it, she said finally. Wade nodded. Of course. But I should mention I've already spoken to Mr. Hollister at the bank and to Dalton at the Silver Dollar. Rachel's head snapped up. You what? I've negotiated to take over your debts, Wade said calmly. All of them. You now owe me rather than them. Anger flashed through Rachel. You had no right. You don't even know me. You're right, Wade acknowledged. But I couldn't stand by and watch them circle like vultures. This way you have options and time to decide. Rachel stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her coffee cup. I don't need your charity, Mr. Sullivan. And I don't appreciate you interfering in my affairs. It's not charity, Wade said, remaining seated. It's an investment, one I hope you'll consider carefully. Rachel left the hotel with her thoughts in turmoil. Wade Sullivan had just taken control of her financial future without her permission. Yet he'd also thrown her a lifeline when she was drowning. The question was whether she could trust him, or whether this apparent act of kindness concealed ulterior motives. The walk home gave her time to think. What choice did she really have? She could accept Wade's offer and walk away with something, or lose everything to foreclosure. And now that he owned her debts, her fate rested in his hands regardless. As Rachel approached her ranch, she noticed a horse tied to the front porch rail. A tall, lean man in a black coat stood waiting, and her heart sank as she recognized Jeremiah Dalton, owner of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Afternoon, Mrs. Blackburn, Dalton called as she approached. I believe we have business to discuss. Rachel stopped several yards away. I understand Mr. Sullivan has taken over my husband's debt to you. Dalton's lips curled into an unpleasant smile. He made an offer, certainly, but I've reconsidered. I believe you and I might come to a more mutually beneficial arrangement. What are you talking about? Rachel demanded, though the look in Dalton's eyes told her everything she needed to know. A beautiful widow like yourself shouldn't be alone, Dalton said, taking a step toward her. I could forgive the debt entirely if you were to show proper appreciation. Rachel's hand went to her pocket where she kept a small derringer. Get off my property, Mr. Dalton, he laughed. Don't be foolish. You're in no position to make demands. Sullivan may have the bank in his pocket, but your husband's debt to me remains. The debt my husband owes you, a deep voice interrupted, has been paid in full. Wade Sullivan rode up on a magnificent chestnut stallion, his expression hard as flint as he regarded Dalton. He dismounted smoothly, handing Rachel a folded paper. The receipt for payment, he told her before turning back to Dalton. We had an agreement. You accepted payment this morning. Dalton's face darkened. Business changes, Sullivan. I've decided the debt is worth more to me now. That's not how it works, Wade said evenly, but Rachel could see the tension in his shoulders. You've been paid. Now leave Mrs. Blackburn alone. For a moment, it seemed Dalton might argue further, but something in Wade's stance made him reconsider. He mounted his horse with a scowl. You've made an enemy today, Sullivan, he warned. Wouldn't be the first time, Wade replied coldly. Won't be the last. After Dalton rode away, Rachel turned to Wade, the receipt still clutched in her hand. Why are you doing all this? Wade's expression softened. Let's talk inside if that's all right. It's getting cold out here. Inside the small ranch house, Rachel lit the stove and put on coffee, more to give herself something to do than out of hospitality. Wade removed his hat, revealing tousled blonde hair, and sat at her kitchen table without invitation. You asked why I'm doing this, he said as she placed a cup of coffee before him. The truth is, I've been watching your ranch for some time. Rachel stiffened. Watching me, you mean? Wade shook his head. Not in the way you're thinking. When I first came to Salida, this was the property I wanted to buy, but Thomas Blackburn beat me to it. He took a sip of coffee. I built my ranch elsewhere and made it work, but this valley has always been prime land. So this is just about the property, Rachel said, relieved and oddly disappointed at the same time. It started that way, Wade admitted. "But then I saw how hard you worked, even when Thomas was." He paused, searching for the right words. "Even when my husband was drinking away our money and chasing saloon girls," Rachel finished for him. Wade met her gaze. "Even then, you never gave up. I admired that." Rachel sat across from him, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know what to do, Mr. Sullivan. You own my debts now. You hold all the cards. Call me Wade," he said quietly. "And I'm not looking to take advantage of you, Mrs. Blackburn. The offer I made is genuine. You can take the 80 acres and start fresh, or—" He hesitated. "Or what?" Rachel prompted. "Or you could consider another arrangement," Wade continued. "I need someone to manage my South Ranch. It's got a good house, better than this one. You'd have a salary, plus a percentage of the calves born each season." Rachel stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to work for you?" "A woman running a cattle operation. You've been running this ranch practically alone for 2 years," Wade pointed out. "And doing a fine job of it considering the circumstances. I've seen how you handle the stock. You have a way with animals." It was true. While Thomas had gambled and drunk, Rachel had learned everything she could about ranching. She'd nursed sick calves, mended fences, and even helped with the branding. What had started as necessity had become a source of pride. "Why not just hire a foreman?" she asked. "Good help is hard to find," Wade said. "And I'd rather give the position to someone who deserves a second chance." The offer was tempting, more tempting than Rachel wanted to admit. A fresh start without the burden of debt, a proper salary. But it would mean working for Wade Sullivan, being beholden to him. "I need time to think," she said finally. Wade stood, placing his hat back on his head. "Of course. Take the week to consider. I'll be moving cattle to winter pasture, but I'll call again next Monday for your answer." After he left, Rachel sank into her chair, emotions warring within her. Pride told her to reject his offer outright. Practicality argued that she'd be a fool to turn down such an opportunity. And something else, something she wasn't ready to examine, stirred at the thought of working closely with Wade Sullivan. The next morning brought a light dusting of snow, a reminder that winter would soon arrive in the Colorado mountains. Rachel went about her chores with her mind still turning over Wade's proposal. As she finished milking the cows, she noticed a rider approaching Olivia Jenkins on her bay mare. "Rachel," Olivia called, dismounting gracefully. "I heard the news and had to come see for myself." Rachel set down her milk pail. "What news?" Olivia's eyes widened. "About Wade Sullivan paying off all your debts. The whole town's talking about it." "Of course they were," Rachel sighed. "It's not what people think. It's a business arrangement." "Is it?" Olivia asked with a knowing smile. "Wade Sullivan could have bought any ranch in the county. There's plenty of land for sale without complications. He's wanted this property for years," Rachel explained. "It connects his north and south pastures." Olivia shook her head. "That man has never shown interest in any woman since coming to Salida, despite half the single ladies throwing themselves at him. Now suddenly he's paying off a widow's debts and offering her a job. People are drawing their own conclusions." Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It's not like that." "He hardly knows me." "He knows enough," Olivia countered. "Everyone's seen how you've kept this place running while Thomas—" She trailed off, then changed course. "What will you do? Accept his offer?" "I haven't decided," Rachel admitted. "It seems too good to be true." Olivia touched her arm gently. "Not all men are like Thomas, Rachel. Some are actually honorable." After Olivia left, her words lingered in Rachel's mind. Was it possible Wade had motivations beyond business? And if so, was she ready for such complications in her life? The week passed quickly. Rachel spent each day evaluating her options, weighing the pride of independence against the practical benefits of Wade's offer. On Saturday, She rode out to see the 80 acres he'd offered her. The land was indeed prime rolling hills with good grass and a clear creek running through it. The cabin was small but solid, with a stone fireplace and a covered porch. It could be a fresh start. A place untainted by memories of Thomas and his failures. Yet as she sat on the porch, looking out over the land, Rachel knew it would be a lonely existence. Just her and the mountains, scratching out a living with no one to share the burden. By Sunday evening, she had made her decision. When Wade Sullivan arrived the next morning, Rachel was ready for him. She'd put on her best dress, a deep blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and braided her auburn hair neatly. Wade dismounted and approached the porch where she waited. He looked different today, freshly shaven, wearing a clean shirt under his riding coat. "Mrs. Blackburn," he greeted her, hat in hand. "I hope you've had enough time to consider my proposal." "I have," Rachel said, meeting his gaze steadily. "And I've decided to accept your offer of employment at the South Ranch." Relief and something else flickered across Wade's face. "I'm glad to hear it. When would you like to move in?" "First, I need to know exactly what this arrangement entails," Rachel said firmly. "I want the terms in writing. Salary, responsibilities, expectations, everything." Wade nodded, looking impressed rather than offended by her businesslike approach. "I've brought a contract." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. Everything spelled out clearly. "You'll receive $30 a month plus 10% of the calf profit at spring roundup. You'll manage 6 hands and approximately 500 head of cattle." Rachel's eyes widened at the salary, more than many men made in similar positions. "That's very generous." "It's what the job is worth," Wade said simply. "I pay for quality." Rachel took the envelope, still hesitant. "And my ranch, what happens to it?" "It becomes part of the Double S," Wade confirmed. "But you're welcome to take any personal belongings, furniture, livestock that isn't mortgaged. And I've included a clause in the contract if at any time in the next 5 years you wish to repurchase your property, you may do so at the price I'm paying now, plus 5% per annum." Rachel stared at him in surprise. "Why would you offer that?" Wade shifted, looking almost uncomfortable for the first time. "Let's just say I believe in second chances, Mrs. Blackburn." "Rachel," she said softly. "If we're to work together, you should call me Rachel." A smile touched Wade's lips. "Rachel, then." It took 3 days to pack Rachel's belongings and prepare for the move. Wade sent 2 wagons and 4 men to help, treating her possessions with more care than she expected. On Thursday morning, Rachel took one last look at the small ranch house that had been her home for 3 years. Despite the hardships she'd endured here, leaving was bittersweet. "Ready, Mrs. Blackburn?" asked Jim Lawson, Wade's foreman who had come to oversee the move. Rachel nodded, unable to trust her voice. She climbed onto the wagon seat next to Jim, and with a flick of the reins, they pulled away from her old life and toward an uncertain future. The South Ranch of the Double S was larger than Rachel had imagined. The main house stood on a hill overlooking a wide valley, with bunkhouses, barns, and corrals sprawling below. Built of sturdy logs with a proper shingled roof, the house was twice the size of her old cabin. Wade was waiting on the porch when they arrived. He helped Rachel down from the wagon, his hand warm and steady around hers. "Welcome to your new home," he said, leading her inside. The interior was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. A dining table that could seat 8 stood near windows overlooking the valley, and a desk in the corner was piled with ledgers and papers. "Your bedroom is upstairs," Wade explained. "Mine is at the North Ranch, but I stay here occasionally when business keeps me on this side of the property." He must have noticed her expression because he quickly added, When I'm here, I use the small room off the kitchen. You'll have complete privacy." Rachel relaxed slightly. "It's a beautiful home." "It needs a woman's touch," Wade said, then cleared his throat. "I mean, it's been managed by men too long. Practical but not particularly comfortable." As the men brought in her trunks and furniture, Rachel explored the house that would be her new domain. The kitchen was well equipped with a cast iron stove and ample cupboards. The upstairs bedroom had a large bed with a handmade quilt and a window seat overlooking the mountains. By evening, her things were arranged to her satisfaction, and Wade had introduced her to the ranch hands she would be supervising. They'd seemed surprised to learn their new manager was a woman, but Wade's clear support had silenced any potential objections. "I'll leave you to settle in," Wade said as the sun began to set. "Jim knows the operation well and can answer any questions you have. I'll be back in a week to see how you're getting on." After he rode away, Rachel stood on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. For the first time in years, she felt a cautious sense of hope. This was a chance to prove herself, to build something on her own terms, without Thomas's shadow hanging over her. The first week passed in a blur of activity as Rachel learned the rhythms of the larger ranch. The cattle were being moved to winter pasture, a complex operation requiring coordination between the north and south ranches. Jim Lawson proved to be a valuable ally, showing her the systems Wade had established and introducing her to the neighboring ranchers. True to his word, Wade returned the following Friday. Rachel was checking fence lines when she saw him riding across the valley. She waved, surprised by the flutter of anticipation she felt at his approach. "How are you settling in?" he asked, dismounting to walk beside her. "Well enough," Rachel replied. "Your men were skeptical at first, but they're coming around." Wade smiled. "I had no doubts. Jim tells me you've already reorganized the feed storage and found a way to reduce waste." Rachel nodded, pleased he'd noticed. "And I've been reviewing the breeding records. I think we could improve the herd by introducing some Hereford bulls next season." They walked the property together, discussing ranch operations with an ease that surprised Rachel. Wade listened to her ideas without dismissing them, asking questions that showed genuine interest in her perspective. As they returned to the house, Wade hesitated at the porch steps. "I was hoping you might join me for supper in town tonight, to celebrate your first week. The hotel restaurant has a decent cook." Rachel was taken aback by the invitation. "Is this a business dinner, Mr. Sullivan?" "Wade," he reminded her. "And yes, primarily business, but also a chance to get to know each other better since we'll be working together." Rachel considered the request. It wasn't improper for a widow to dine with a business associate, yet she sensed this might be more than a simple business meeting. The thought both alarmed and intrigued her. "I'll need time to change," she said finally. Wade's smile brightened his entire face. "I'll hitch up the buggy." The Colorado House Hotel dining room was crowded that evening. Rachel felt the curious stares of Salada's residents as Wade escorted her to a table in the corner. Her navy blue dress, one of the few nice garments she owned, suddenly felt inadequate among the fashionable attire of the other diners. "Ignore them," Wade said quietly, noting her discomfort. "People will always talk." "And what are they saying now, I wonder?" Rachel asked dryly. Wade's expression turned serious. "That I'm the luckiest man in the room to be dining with you." The unexpected compliment caught Rachel off guard, warming her cheeks. Before she could respond, the waiter arrived to take their order. Over a meal of roast beef and potatoes, Wade told Rachel about his journey west from Pennsylvania 8 years earlier. The son of a blacksmith, he'd worked cattle drives in Texas before saving enough to purchase land in Colorado. "What made you choose ranching?" Rachel asked, genuinely curious. Most men who come west are chasing gold or silver. I wanted to build something lasting, Wade explained. Mining towns boom and bust, but good land endures, and I've always had a way with animals. Something we have in common, Rachel observed. Wade studied her across the table. Tell me about you. Before Thomas, before Colorado. Who was Rachel Blackburn then? The question was more personal than Rachel expected, but she found herself wanting to answer. Rachel Bennett was a schoolteacher's daughter from St. Louis. Practical, somewhat naive, with romantic notions about the West. And now, Wade prompted. Now I'm a widow with no illusions left, Rachel said, more harshly than she'd intended. She softened her tone. But I'm also stronger than I was, more certain of what I want. And what is it you want, Rachel? Wade asked quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and Rachel felt a connection that both thrilled and frightened her. Before she could answer, a commotion at the entrance to the dining room drew their attention. Jeremiah Dalton stood in the doorway, clearly drunk and looking for trouble. His gaze swept the room until it landed on their table. Well, he slurred loudly. If it isn't Sullivan and the Blackburn widow, cozy arrangement you two have worked out. Wade's expression hardened as he stood. This isn't the place, Dalton. Dalton staggered forward, ignoring Wade's warning. Everyone's wondering if she's paying off her husband's debts in your bed, Sullivan. Care to comment? The room fell silent. Rachel felt as if she'd been slapped, humiliation burning through her. Wade moved with surprising speed for such a large man. In 2 strides, he reached Dalton and grabbed him by the collar, practically lifting him off the floor. Apologize to the lady, Wade growled, his voice deadly quiet. Fear flickered in Dalton's bloodshot eyes. It was just a joke, apologize, Wade repeated, tightening his grip. I'm sorry, Mrs. Blackburn, Dalton choked out. Wade released him with a slight shove. Get out. And if I ever hear you speak about Mrs. Blackburn disrespectfully again, you'll be eating through a straw for a month. As Dalton stumbled from the dining room, Rachel stood shakily. I should go. Wade turned to her, his anger instantly replaced with concern. Rachel, I'm sorry, don't let him ruin the evening. But the damage was done. Every eye in the restaurant was on them, and Rachel could practically hear the whispers that would follow. She'd been naive to think people wouldn't draw exactly the conclusions Dalton had voiced. Please, she said quietly, take me home. The ride back to the ranch was silent, tension filling the small space of the buggy. When they arrived, Wade helped her down, his touch careful and respectful. Rachel, he began. What Dalton said was what everyone is thinking, Rachel finished for him. You've paid my debts and given me a job. People will naturally assume there's more to our arrangement. Wade's jaw tightened. Let them think what they want. We know the truth. Do we? Rachel challenged, suddenly needing clarity. Why did you really help me, Wade? The truth this time. In the moonlight, Wade's expression was difficult to read. He took a breath, seeming to come to a decision. The first time I saw you was at the Founders' Day picnic 2 years ago, he said slowly. You were laughing at something, your head thrown back, sunlight in your hair. Thomas was off drinking with his friends, ignoring you completely. Wade's gaze held hers. I thought then that any man who could neglect a woman like you didn't deserve her. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. So this is. What? Rescue? Charity? No, Wade said firmly. It started as admiration, then respect as I watched you fight to keep your ranch going despite Thomas's mistakes. When he died and I heard about the debts, I saw a chance to help, but also, Rachel prompted when he hesitated. Also a chance to know you, Wade admitted quietly. Not as Thomas Blackburn's wife, but as Rachel. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep inside Rachel. For 3 years, she'd been defined by her husband's failures, pitied by the townspeople, dismissed as a woman who'd chosen poorly. Wade was the first person to see beyond that, to see her. "I'm not ready for whatever this is," Rachel said carefully. "Thomas has been gone barely a month, and I'm still finding my footing in this new life." Wade nodded, accepting her words without argument. "I understand. And I'm not asking for anything beyond what we've already agreed to. You have a job as long as you want it, with no other expectations." As he prepared to leave, Rachel impulsively reached for his hand. "Thank you, not just for tonight, but for seeing something in me worth believing in." Wade's fingers tightened briefly around hers. "Good night, Rachel." As winter settled over the Colorado mountains, Rachel threw herself into her work at the South Ranch. The cattle required constant attention as snow blanketed the lower pastures, and she spent long days on horseback, checking on the herd and ensuring they had access to feed and water. Wade visited regularly, though he was careful to maintain a professional distance. They discussed ranch operations, made plans for the spring calving season, and occasionally shared meals in the main house, but he never again alluded to personal feelings. Yet something was growing between them, an understanding, a partnership that went beyond employer and employee. Rachel found herself looking forward to his visits, enjoying their conversations that ranged from practical ranch matters to books they'd read and places they'd seen. December brought the heaviest snowfall in years, isolating the ranch for days at a time. On Christmas Eve, Rachel was surprised to see Wade arriving through the deep snow, leading a pack horse laden with supplies. "I thought you'd be spending the holiday at the North Ranch," she said, as he stamped snow from his boots on the porch, "and leave you and the men without Christmas dinner." Wade replied, grinning as he revealed a turkey and other provisions from the pack. "Besides, no one should be alone at Christmas." Together they prepared a feast for the ranch hands, roasting the turkey in the big kitchen stove and making pies from preserved apples. As they worked side by side, Rachel realized how comfortable she felt in Wade's presence, how natural it seemed to share this domestic task with him. After dinner, when the men had returned to the bunkhouse with full bellies and high spirits, Rachel and Wade sat before the fireplace with cups of hot cider. "I have something for you," Wade said, reaching into his coat pocket. He handed Rachel a small package wrapped in brown paper. "You didn't need to get me a gift," Rachel protested, though she was touched by the gesture. "Open it," Wade urged. Inside the paper was a small leather-bound book of poetry, Tennyson's collected works. Rachel ran her fingers over the embossed cover, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "How did you know I like poetry?" she asked. Wade smiled. "I noticed you had a volume of Wordsworth among your books when we moved your things. This seemed a fitting companion." Rachel had a gift for him as well, a hand-knitted scarf she'd worked on during the long winter evenings. "It's not much," she said as she presented it, "but the nights can be cold when you're riding between ranches." Wade wrapped the scarf around his neck, his expression suggesting he'd received the greatest treasure. "It's perfect, thank you." As the fire crackled and snow fell silently outside, Rachel felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself, but sitting here with Wade, she could envision a future that held more than just survival. January brought brutal cold and a series of blizzards that tested even the hardiest ranchers. Wade moved temporarily to the South Ranch to help manage the crisis as cattle began dying in the deep snow. For 2 weeks, they worked from dawn until well after dark, digging pathways to feed grounds and breaking ice on water holes. One evening, as they returned exhausted from a day of battling the elements, Wade suddenly swayed in his saddle. Rachel watched in alarm as he nearly fell, catching himself at the last moment. "Wade," she cried, dismounting quickly to reach his side. "What's wrong?" "Just tired," he mumbled, but as he dismounted, Rachel saw he was shivering violently. She helped him into the house, alarmed by the heat radiating from his skin despite the biting cold. "You're burning up with fever." Wade collapsed onto the sofa, too weak to argue as Rachel removed his snow-covered coat and boots. "The cattle," he protested weakly. "The North herd." "Jim and the boys will handle it," Rachel assured him, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "You're no good to anyone if you work yourself to death." Through the night, Rachel tended to Wade as his fever raged. She bathed his face with cool water, spooned broth between his cracked lips, and prayed as he drifted in and out of consciousness. By morning, she was frantic enough to send Jim for the doctor, but the roads were impassable with snow. On the third day, Wade's fever finally broke. Rachel had dozed off in a chair beside the sofa when his voice, weak but clear, woke her. "You look exhausted," he said, managing a ghost of a smile. Relief flooded through Rachel as she took his hand. "You terrified me." "I'm sorry," Wade whispered. "Not very heroic of me, collapsing like that." "Even heroes need someone to catch them sometimes," Rachel said softly. As Wade recovered his strength, their relationship subtly shifted. The experience of caring for him, of fearing for his life, had stripped away Rachel's remaining defenses. She found herself touching him more often, a hand on his arm, fingers brushing as they shared a meal, and he responded with a warmth that both comforted and excited her. By February, Wade had returned to the North Ranch, but his visits became more frequent. He often brought small gifts, a book, a jar of honey from a traveling peddler, wildflowers that had pushed through the melting snow. Never anything extravagant, but always thoughtful, always something that showed he was paying attention to her preferences and needs. As spring approached and the days lengthened, Rachel began to acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Wade Sullivan. The realization was both wonderful and terrifying. Thomas's betrayals had left deep scars, and the thought of trusting another man with her heart seemed like an impossible risk. Yet Wade was nothing like Thomas. Where Thomas had been charming but weak, Wade was steady and honest. Where Thomas had taken, Wade gave. And where Thomas had seen Rachel as an accessory to his ambitions, Wade saw her as a partner, a woman of value and strength. The spring roundup brought the North and South Ranch hands together for branding and counting the new calves. Rachel worked alongside the men, proving her worth in the demanding days of sorting cattle and tallying the herd. Wade watched her with undisguised admiration, and more than once, she caught his gaze lingering on her when he thought she wasn't looking. On the final evening of roundup, Wade invited Rachel to ride with him to a ridge overlooking both ranches. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks as they dismounted and stood side by side, surveying the vast property. "You've done an amazing job with the South Ranch," Wade said. "Profits are up 20% from last year, and the hands respect you more than they ever did the previous foreman." Rachel smiled, taking pride in her accomplishment. "It's been challenging but rewarding. Thank you for giving me the chance." Wade turned to face her, his expression serious. "I have something to ask you, Rachel, something I've been wanting to ask for months." Rachel's heart began to race, sensing the importance of the moment. "What is it?" Wade took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "When I paid Thomas's debts, people assumed I had ulterior motives. In truth, I wanted to help you, but I also hoped for a chance to know you better." He paused, gathering his courage. "These past months working together have been the happiest of my life. You're strong, intelligent, kind, everything I've ever wanted in a partner." Rachel's breath caught as Wade dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I'm asking for your heart, Rachel Blackburn. Will you marry me? Not because of debts or obligations, but because I love you and want to build a life with you." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as emotions overwhelmed her. Fear and hope warred within her chest, fear of being hurt again, hope for a future brighter than she dared imagine. "Wade, she began, struggling to find the right words. "After Thomas, I promised myself I'd never depend on a man again. That I'd make my own way." Disappointment flickered in Wade's eyes, but he nodded, accepting her hesitation. "I understand." "No, let me finish," Rachel said, squeezing his hands. "What I've learned these past months is that there's a difference between dependence and partnership. You've never tried to control me or diminish me. You've given me space to prove myself, to grow stronger." She took a deep breath. "And in that space, I've discovered that I love you too." Wade's face transformed with joy. "Is that a yes?" Rachel smiled through her tears. "Yes, Wade Sullivan. I'll marry you." He rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss tender at first, then deepening with a passion that left them both breathless. As they held each other against the backdrop of the setting sun, Rachel felt the final pieces of her broken heart mending, forming something new and stronger than before. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Salada Church. Olivia Jenkins stood as Rachel's witness, beaming with satisfaction at the match she'd foreseen months earlier. The townspeople, who had once whispered about their arrangement, now celebrated the union of two of Chaffee County's most respected ranchers. As Wade slipped a gold band onto Rachel's finger, she looked into his clear blue eyes and saw her future reflected there, not as Thomas Blackburn's widow or Wade Sullivan's wife, but as Rachel, a woman who had found the strength to rebuild her life and the courage to love again. The wedding celebration continued at the Double S, with ranch hands from both properties and friends from town gathering for a feast and dancing. As twilight fell, Wade led Rachel away from the revelry and down to the creek, where they'd first discussed her taking the manager position. "I have a wedding gift for you," he said, producing a folded document from his pocket. Rachel recognized it immediately, the deed to her former ranch. "Wade, we discussed this. The past is behind us. Open it," he insisted gently. Rachel unfolded the paper and gasped. The deed now bore both their names, Wade and Rachel Sullivan, joint owners. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at him questioningly. Wade's expression was solemn. "When I offered to buy your ranch, I promised you could repurchase it someday if you wished. Consider this the fulfillment of that promise. The land belongs to both of us now, as equal partners in every sense." Rachel was speechless, overwhelmed by the significance of his gesture. In returning partial ownership of her former home, Wade was acknowledging her independence even as they joined their lives together. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "Not just for this, but for seeing me, truly seeing me when everyone else only saw a widow with debts." Wade turned his head to kiss her palm. "From the moment I paid those debts, I wasn't looking for repayment. I was asking for a chance to earn your heart." As the stars appeared overhead and the sounds of celebration drifted from the main house, Rachel stood on tiptoe to kiss her husband. "It was a fair trade," she murmured against his lips. "The best bargain I ever made." 5 years later, Rachel stood on the porch of the main ranch house, watching as Wade taught their 3-year-old son, Thomas Wade Sullivan, to sit astride a gentle pony. Their 1-year-old daughter, Emma, babbled happily in Rachel's arms, reaching chubby hands toward her father and brother. The Double S had prospered beyond their expectations, becoming one of the largest and most successful ranching operations in Colorado. Rachel still managed the South Ranch, though she now had a capable assistant who helped during the weeks when she needed to devote time to their children. Wade approached the porch, lifting Thomas from the pony and setting him down to run to his mother. "I think we have a natural horseman here," he said proudly, ruffling their son's dark hair. "Like his father," Rachel agreed, shifting Emma to her hip so she could embrace her boy. Wade's arm circled her waist as they stood together, a family framed against the backdrop of the mountains and the ranch they'd built. "Are you happy, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked, the question he posed every year on their anniversary. Rachel looked around at the life they'd created, the thriving ranch, their beautiful children, the love that had grown deeper with each passing season. From the depths of despair after Thomas's death, she had found not just survival but joy, not just security but passion. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. "Who would have thought that a widow's debts could lead to such riches?" Wade smiled, kissing her softly as their children giggled between them. "Not debts," he corrected gently. "Investments. The best investment I ever made." As the sun began to set over the Colorado mountains, painting the valley in gold and crimson, Rachel leaned into her husband's embrace, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. What had begun as a business arrangement had blossomed into a love story as vast and enduring as the western landscape itself, a testament to second chances and the healing power of a heart brave enough to love again. The Double S Ranch continued to flourish through the years, becoming a landmark in Chaffee County and beyond. Wade and Rachel Sullivan raised their children with the same values that had guided their own lives: honesty, hard work, and the courage to follow their hearts. And when visitors asked how the successful ranching empire had begun, Wade would smile at his wife and simply say, "With a debt that could only be paid in love."